The house smelled like roasted turkey and betrayal. Camille stood in the kitchen, hands submerged in soapy water, watching her family through the narrow pass-through window. The laughter at the dining table was loud, almost forced, like a performance put on for the benefit of anyone still pretending everything was fine. Her mother, Patrice, hovered behind the head chair, refilling wine glasses and passing around the mashed potatoes with mechanical joy. At that very chair sat Camille's sister Brielle, radiant and smug, a diamond ring flashing each time she gestured her hand dramatically. It wasn't just any diamond ring. It was Camille's. Not literally, of course, but it should have been. 3 months ago, Camille and James had been talking about engagement. He had come to 3 family dinners, helped clean up, made a birthday toast to her father, and called her mom Ma, with a shy kind of affection. Camille had seen a future, until the future got stolen, and there sat Brielle, her baby sister, with James's arm wrapped around her like a reward. Everyone knew. No one talked about it. Not her parents. Not even her Aunt Dolores, who usually thrived on tension like a spider sensing movement in its web. They'd all chosen silence. And Camille, humiliated, angry, and aching, had been told to rise above it. So she'd come. To Thanksgiving. To maintain peace. To show them she wasn't broken. But the silence was eating her alive. The doorbell rang, jarring the moment. Patrice, ever the hostess, fluttered to answer it. Camille turned off the faucet and dried her hands slowly, her stomach nodding. No one else was expected. Then she heard the voice. Deep. Hesitant. "Hey, is Camille here?" Camille stepped out of the kitchen and locked eyes with Daniel. James's best friend. She hadn't seen him since the breakup, if it could even be called that. James had ghosted her. No explanation. Just a slow fade, then a sudden post of Brielle, on his Instagram with a "She Said Yes" caption. Camille had deleted her account that same night. Daniel looked nervous, hands shoved into his coat pockets. His presence disrupted the illusion of peace. The table quieted. Even Brielle's smile faltered. Patrice rushed to cover the tension. "Oh, Daniel, how wonderful to see you. We weren't expecting—" "I know," he said, gaze fixed on Camille. "But I needed to talk to her. It's important." Camille didn't move. "Outside?" he asked gently. She nodded and walked past her family without a word. The wind outside stung her cheeks. Daniel shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. "I shouldn't have waited this long," he said. "But I thought you deserved to know the truth." She raised an eyebrow. "Which part?" "The part where James never planned to marry you." Camille's stomach dropped. He and Brielle were messing around while he was still with you. But your mom found out, and instead of stopping it, she told him to end things with you quietly. Said you were too serious, and that Brielle was a better match for the family. Camille's lips parted, a silent gasp. Her mother? Daniel nodded. He didn't even pick the ring. Patrice did. She paid for it. Camille staggered back a step. Daniel reached out but stopped himself. "I thought you should know. You deserved way better." Camille's breath turned to mist in the air, her heart pounding. She wasn't just betrayed by James, or Brielle. Her own mother had orchestrated it. A tremor ran through her. Then, slowly, a new kind of heat bloomed in her chest. Clarity. She looked up at Daniel. "Thank you," He gave a small nod. "If you ever need anything, I'm here." She turned back toward the house, but something inside her had changed. This wasn't going to end with silence. Camille walked back inside. The laughter had resumed, albeit softer. As she stepped into the dining room, all eyes turned to her. She didn't sit. She walked toward the head of the table and stood behind her sister. "Brielle," she said calmly, "how's the ring? Is it heavy carrying around someone else's future?" A fork clattered against a plate. Brielle blinked. "What?" Camille smiled. "Not out of joy, but power. Daniel just told me everything. About you. About James. About Mom's little matchmaking efforts." Patrice rose quickly, face flushed. "Camille, this isn't the place." "No, Mom," Camille said, her voice hard now. "This is exactly the place." Silence fell again. But this time it belonged to Camille. I was lied to. By my own family. And you all just sat here, pretending like I'd vanished. Like I didn't matter. But I'm done playing along. Her father's face was pale. Brielle looked like a child caught in a lie. And Patrice's eyes were sharp, cold, calculating. Camille walked over to her seat, took a slow sip of her wine, and then calmly set it down. "You wanted silence, so you didn't have to feel guilty," she said. "But I'm done staying quiet." And then she stood, placed her napkin down, and walked out the door without another word. Camille didn't cry that night. She drove aimlessly through the sleepy streets of her hometown, past shuttered shops and dimly lit porches wrapped in strings of premature Christmas lights. Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat. Texts from Brielle, voicemails from Patrice, even one missed call from her father. She ignored them all. The weight of betrayal pressed against her chest like a boulder she couldn't lift, but buried underneath it was something far more volatile than sadness. Resolve. She wasn't going to let them move on like nothing happened. Not this time. By the time she pulled into her apartment complex, the November wind had turned vicious. She climbed the stairs to her unit, unlocked the door, and stepped into a quiet space filled with shadows. Her apartment still smelled faintly of cinnamon and vanilla, remnants of the candle she lit before leaving for dinner. A cruel contrast to the emotional wreckage still clinging to her skin. She flicked on a lamp and stood in the middle of the room, unsure what to do next. Then her eyes drifted to the cedar box on the top shelf of her bookcase. It had belonged to her grandmother. She hadn't opened it since the funeral 3 years ago. Patrice had handed it to her with no ceremony, no explanation. Just a cold, "She wanted you to have this." At the time, Camille had assumed it was sentimental junk, old photos or maybe jewelry no one else wanted. But now, with the sharp edge of betrayal still fresh in her mind, her instincts nudged her toward it. She pulled the box down and opened it slowly. Inside were a few folded letters, a dried rose wrapped in wax paper, and one small velvet pouch. Camille reached for the first letter. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, slanted, ink faded at the edges. "To my darling Camille," it began. Her breath caught. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And you're old enough now to know the truth about our family. I've watched your mother twist loyalty into silence your whole life. I saw how she made you doubt your instincts, your worth. And I stayed quiet because I thought I could protect you by loving you harder. But love without truth is its own kind of prison. What your mother did to me," she's doing to you. She didn't just steal from me, Camille. She stole the inheritance your grandfather left specifically for you. She manipulated him in his final days, forged signatures, and then buried the paperwork. I have no proof, just this letter, and the truth I couldn't let die with me. But you are not her. You are fire. You are mine. Use what I couldn't. Burn the silence down. Camille's hands trembled as she read. The velvet pouch held a small flash drive. No label, no note. Just cold, silent weight in her palm. She plugged it into her laptop. Dozens of files popped up. Scanned documents, transaction receipts, a PDF titled Amended Will, Original Copy. Her heart raced. It was dated 6 weeks before her grandfather passed away, and Camille's name was on it. She blinked rapidly, mouth going dry. The original will had left his lakeside cottage and a trust fund worth $180,000 for her. Patrice and Brielle's names were nowhere to be found. Camille clicked on more files, emails from a legal assistant, voice memos, even scanned correspondence between Patrice and an estate lawyer. The last memo was damning. Delete the second. Will. She can't prove anything. Camille's too naive to go looking. The next morning, Camille walked into her office at the nonprofit legal clinic where she worked. Exhausted but sharper than she'd felt in months. Her friend and colleague Amina looked up from her desk. Whoa, you look dangerous. Camille smiled thinly. I need a crash course in estate fraud. Got a minute? Amina blinked, then stood. Who are we going after? Camille leaned in. My mother. Back at home that evening, Camille received a new text from Brielle. Please, don't make this worse. James and I are in love. You're the one who can't move on. Camille stared at it for a moment, then replied, You're right. I am moving on. Just not the way you think. Then she blocked her. The next few days were a blur of meetings, late-night research, and quiet unraveling. Camille pieced together timelines, matched documents, and even found inconsistencies in tax filings from the year her grandfather died. Patrice had laundered the funds through a trust in Brielle's name, buried under shell paperwork, but not impossible to trace. On Friday, she took a deep breath and called the one person who might still have a spine in the family, her father. Dad, she said when he picked up, I know everything. About the will, about what Mom did. I have proof. A long pause, then a weary sigh. Camille, please just let this go. It's too late. What's done is done. No, it's not. And you know it. He sounded older than she remembered. I didn't know what she was planning. I found out too late, and I was afraid of losing everything. You already did, she said, voice like ice. She hung up. On Sunday morning, Camille printed everything out and walked into a local attorney's office, an old friend of her grandmother's, a woman named Eleanor Graves, a tough, respected estate lawyer with a reputation for biting hard. Eleanor read through the files in silence. When she looked up, her eyes were gleaming. Sweetheart, she said slowly, if this is what it looks like, your mother's entire house of cards is about to collapse. Camille exhaled for the first time in, Daisy, good. I want her to feel everything I felt, and worse. The following week, a legal notice arrived at Patrice's doorstep in a matte envelope with sharp corners, clean, professional, and completely out of place among the glossy catalogs and Thanksgiving charity appeals. It was from Eleanor Graves, acting on behalf of Camille Delaney. Inside, a formal petition to reopen the estate of Francis Delaney, Camille's grandfather. Attached was a motion alleging will suppression and trust fund misappropriation, backed by sworn declarations and authenticated copies of the lost amended will. Patrice's name was listed under respondents, alongside Brielle's. Patrice stared at the letter, her hand frozen on the page. Across the room, Brielle munched on a pear and scrolled on her phone. "Something wrong?" Brielle asked, not looking up. Patrice didn't answer. She picked up her phone and dialed Camille. Voicemail. "Camille," she said through gritted teeth. "We need to talk. Immediately." Click. Camille sat in Eleanor's office, watching her mother's voicemail play out on speaker. She didn't flinch. Eleanor leaned forward. "We filed with probate court. They'll send a notice of hearing within 10 days. Given the weight of the evidence, I expect the judge will grant a formal inquiry." Camille nodded. "And, Eleanor," continued, "I'd like to go a step further." Camille raised her brows. "We can pursue criminal charges. Forgery, fraud, misuse of a trust. It'll get ugly. Your mother will lose a lot more than money." For a long moment, Camille said nothing. Her jaw tightened. She thought of her mother's silence at that dinner table. The look she wore when she handed Camille the cedar box, knowing what it contained. Cold calculation dressed in maternal performance. "She already lost me," Camille said at last. "The rest is just numbers." Later that evening, Camille stood in the lakeside cottage mentioned in her grandfather's will. Eleanor had called ahead to the real estate board, verifying that it was still in the family trust and technically unoccupied. It had been locked up for years, used by Patrice to impress dinner guests with sentimental stories of her father's old fishing house. Now, the key Camille held in her hand, the one that had been tucked inside the pouch along with the flash drive, slid into the front door like it had never stopped fitting. The scent of cedar and dust welcomed her, and something else, something soft, familiar. She stepped inside. The space was frozen in time. Old quilts still lined the rocking chair by the window. A thermos sat abandoned on the shelf. The fireplace was cold, but logs were stacked neatly, waiting. On the wall hung a photo of Camille at 8 years old, sitting on her grandfather's lap, his fishing rod in her small hands. She sat down on the floor, let her back rest against the wood panels, and stared at the photo until her eyes blurred. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about what they erased. 2 days later, Camille received a text from her father. "She's panicking. I've never seen her like this. Can we talk?" She ignored it. Then, unexpectedly, Brielle messaged her. "You've made your point. You're humiliating Mom. I hope you're proud." Camille typed back. She humiliated herself. "I'm just turning the lights on." Then blocked her too. At the upcoming probate hearing, Camille walked in wearing a charcoal blazer over a black turtleneck. Simple, strong, quiet power. Patrice was already seated at the opposite table, pearls tight on her neck, her lawyer whispering urgently into her ear. She glanced at Camille, just once, but Camille didn't return the gaze. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The clerk read out the motion. Petition to reopen estate based on discovery of amended will and evidence of fraudulent concealment. As Eleanor rose to present, Camille's heartbeat steadied. Not racing, not afraid. This was what justice felt like. Methodical, unflinching, deliberate. Eleanor laid out the timeline. Camille's possession of the amended will, the correspondence suggesting suppression, Patrice's transactions diverting, trust funds through Brielle. Then the judge turned to Patrice's counsel. Any objections to the document's validity? Her lawyer stood stiffly. Your Honor, we request time to verify its authenticity. If valid, my client is prepared to enter settlement negotiations in good faith. Camille leaned in and whispered to Eleanor. No settlements. Eleanor smiled faintly. Understood. That night, Camille returned to the cottage. For the first time in years, she lit a fire in the hearth and opened a bottle of wine she found in the old pantry, still corked and dust-covered, labeled with a sticky note. Save for Camille's graduation. She stared at the flames, wine glass in hand, the warmth brushing against her skin. A voice broke the silence. Nice place. She turned. Daniel stood at the threshold, his coat dusted with snow. Camille blinked. How'd you find me? I knew your grandfather, he said simply. This is where he brought you after your first bad breakup, remember? You were 17. You cried for hours because some senior dumped you after prom. Camille smiled despite herself. I figured if you ever needed to heal, you'd come back here. She stood and walked toward him. Thanks for telling me the truth, she said. Everyone else just let it happen. Daniel stepped closer, his expression soft. You always deserved more than what they gave you. Their eyes met in the low glow of the fire. Camille looked down. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with all of this when it's over. Daniel tilted his head. Start over. Start something that's yours. Camille's jaw set with quiet determination. I will. The court proceedings stretched into December. By the third hearing, Patrice's attorneys had stopped denying the will's authenticity. Their strategy shifted to minimizing the fallout. They argued Camille's grandfather had been under duress, that he was emotionally manipulated near the end, that perhaps the amended will had been drafted hastily and never intended for execution. But Camille's legal team, led by Eleanor Graves, dismantled every counterpoint with precision. Every time Patrice's lawyer spoke, Camille watched her mother's facade crack just a little more. Her once pristine posture started to slump. Her jaw tightened. And her once commanding presence in the courtroom felt like a ghost clinging to vanity. But behind that controlled poise, Camille saw something else. Fear. Back at the cottage, Camille found refuge in routine. She woke early, chopped wood, made coffee the old-fashioned way, and walked by the frozen lake as mist curled up from the water's edge. At night, she sat by the fire with her laptop open, scrolling through emails from the legal team and sorting out her grandfather's old ledgers, one page at a time. The silence was no longer oppressive. It had become hers. One evening, just as the snow began to fall in fat, quiet flakes, a package arrived at her door. Inside was a manila envelope and a note that read, I should have said something sooner. I was a coward. This doesn't fix it, but maybe it helps. Dad. Camille opened the envelope slowly. Inside were copies of old bank statements, notarized letters, and most importantly, a handwritten letter from Francis Delaney himself, dated just weeks before his death. Camille, if you're reading this, someone tried to keep this from you. I don't have much time, And I know your mother is circling like a hawk around my final days. I've asked Ted from the bank to make sure this reaches you, one way or another. She thinks because she holds the checkbook, she holds the truth, but the truth belongs to you. You were always the one who asked the hard questions, the one who saw through the polite smiles and figured out where the cracks were. It's why I chose you. This house, this land, and what little wealth I have, these are tools, not rewards. Use them to protect yourself, or to walk away. But whatever you do, do not let them silence you like they did me. You were never the quiet one. You were the storm. Camille set the letter down slowly, her hands shaking. Not with grief, but something close to pride. He saw her, even then, and now everyone would. The following week, the hearing drew media attention. Not national, but local outlets began sniffing around the scandal. A respected family accused of concealing a will, transferring assets meant for a grandchild, and leveraging their social status to keep it quiet. When reporters started calling the family home, Patrice snapped. Camille watched the implosion happen from a distance. Patrice released a carefully worded statement through her lawyer, blaming clerical confusion and a deeply regrettable misunderstanding. But Camille, with Eleanor's permission, sent a copy of her grandfather's letter to the State Chronicle. She added nothing else, just the image of his handwriting and a sentence from the will itself. To Camille Delaney, I leave the lake house and the family trust, because she is the only one who ever asked what legacy truly means. The piece ran with the headline, "Local Heiress, Hid Will to Disinherit Granddaughter, Files Reveal." It was the first time the community saw Patrice Delaney not as a dignified matriarch, but as a woman clinging to privilege. Camille was in the cottage, watching the snowfall thicken when Brielle showed up. No warning, no text, just a sharp knock on the front door. Camille opened it slowly, her eyes narrowing at the sight of her sister, wrapped in a too-thin coat, mascara smudged, expression taut with rage and desperation. "I need to talk to you," Brielle said. Camille didn't move. "Why would I want that?" "Because you're ruining everything," Brielle snapped, stepping forward like she still had the right. "The name, our mother's work, my engagement. James's family saw the article and now they're asking questions. Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Camille stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "What I'm doing," she said coldly, "is what no one else had the courage to do." "You could have just let it go," Brielle hissed. "You always have to be the hero." Camille tilted her head. "And you always needed someone else to clean up your mess." There was a long silence. Brielle's breath misted between them. Her voice cracked when she spoke next. "Do you even care what this is doing to Mom?" Camille stared at her sister for a long, frozen moment. "I cared," she said quietly. "I cared when I cried in that house for 3 days and no one came to check on me. I cared when I watched the man I loved marry into a lie you helped create. And I still cared, even after I found out she took what was mine and fed it to you. With a silver spoon." Camille stepped forward, her voice steel. "But caring doesn't mean I stay quiet anymore." Brielle swallowed, her face stiff. "So this is it then? You're going to destroy the family?" Camille leaned in. "No, I'm just pulling off the mask. You destroyed the family. I'm just giving it a mirror." That night, Camille stood by the window of the cottage, watching the snow fall heavier now, blanketing the world in silence, again. But this time, It was a silence she chose. The snowstorm lasted 2 days. By the time the skies cleared, the town was hushed under a heavy white sheet, as if nature itself had tried to cover the scandal unfolding in the Delaney family name. But Camille knew better. Storms didn't erase things. They revealed what stayed standing after the winds passed. The lakeside cottage stood, and so did she. On Monday morning, Eleanor called with a new update. The court's scheduling a final, ruling hearing for next week, she said. Patrice's team is pushing for private arbitration. They're offering a deal, $180,000 in exchange for dropping all remaining charges, including the criminal ones. Camille was silent on the line. Eleanor hesitated. It's not a bad settlement, Camille. You'd win the civil case and avoid dragging this into a courtroom trial. Camille's voice was calm. That's not enough. Eleanor exhaled. Tell me what you want. I want her name printed next to the words estate fraud. I want the court to confirm what she did. I want to walk back into that house she lied in and not feel like I'm intruding on a lie. A pause. I want her to lose. The one thing she can't buy back, respect. Eleanor said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, then we don't settle. At the same time, Patrice was losing grip on her reputation. The Chronicle followed up their expose with a local podcast interview of an anonymous former Delaney staff member who described a pattern of intimidation, financial manipulation, and internal silencing within the Delaney household. Though names were withheld, everyone in town knew. Patrice's book club friends stopped showing up. The charity foundation she'd chaired for a decade paused her position until further review. Even James, whose absence had been noticeable for weeks, publicly deactivated his accounts, removed all posts involving Brielle, and released a short note. I was unaware of the full situation. I regret my involvement. I wish Camille well. The breakup was quiet but undeniable. Brielle, humiliated, moved back in with their parents. Camille saw it all from afar and felt no joy in it. Just justice. 3 days before the final hearing, Camille's father showed up at the cottage. He didn't knock this time. He just stood. Outside, like a man waiting to be judged. She opened the door and folded her arms. I'm not here to defend her, he said before she could speak. I wanted to say something before this ends. Camille raised a brow. Ends? You think this ends? He looked older than before, gray at the temples, voice softer. I should have done something when I found out. I should have stopped her. I knew about the account under Brielle's name. I knew the will didn't match the one your grandfather showed me months earlier. Camille's throat tightened. Why didn't you? He looked down. Because I was tired. And weak. And because your mother always convinced me that keeping the peace was better than facing the truth. Silence stretched between them. I let her erase you, he whispered, and I let myself believe you'd be fine. Because you were strong. But that was just another excuse. I was a coward. Camille swallowed, staring at him. Then quietly, and what do you want from me now? He looked up, pained. Nothing. Just to tell you the truth. Finally. Camille didn't move, but she didn't close the door either. That night, Camille found herself back in her grandfather's study at the cottage, sorting through boxes she hadn't touched before. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Maybe a sign, maybe nothing, What she found was a journal. Old leather, spine cracked. Inside, pages of notes, memories, quotes. And on one page, in bold ink, "Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you protect while you're here." She traced the words with her finger and made her decision. On the morning of the final hearing, Camille walked into court with her head held high. No one from her family dared meet her eyes as she passed. The judge read aloud the evidence, the confirmed will, the forged tax forms, the testimony Camille had sworn to under oath. The courtroom was quiet as the ruling came. The court finds that the petitioner, Camille Delaney, was wrongfully removed from the amended will through intentional suppression. The court restores the inheritance in full, including the lake house, trust fund, and associated assets. Then the words Camille waited for. Furthermore, the court finds sufficient grounds to refer Patrice Delaney for criminal investigation on charges of estate fraud, forgery, and willful concealment of inheritance documents. Patrice gasped audibly. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm. Brielle lowered her head into her hands. Camille didn't cry. She just stood tall, nodded once, and walked out into the cold winter light. Outside the courthouse, reporters surged. Microphones, flashbulbs, voices shouting questions. "Camille, how do you feel? What do you plan to do with the trust? Do you want to see your mother behind bars?" She stopped in front of the crowd. Snow fell gently against her shoulders. Her voice was clear. "I just wanted the truth. I think that's worth more than any house or bank account. And I hope every family watching this, every daughter who's ever been silenced, knows that it's okay to stop pretending." And then she walked away. 2 weeks after the final hearing, Patrice Delaney was formally indicted. Camille read the headline in quiet solitude, sitting at the edge of the cottage dock, her boots dusted with frost, and her breath curling in the cold morning air. The lake had frozen over now, a mirror of her new life. Still, raw, but unbreakable. Her phone buzzed again and again in her pocket. Local news requests, podcasts, interviews, even a publisher offering an advance if she'd write a book. She silenced the phone. This story was still hers. She wasn't ready to give it away. Inside the house, Camille had started restoring what was lost. The old cottage had lived in neglect for years, used as a prop but never loved. She stripped out the mildewed curtains, repainted the chipped walls, and rewired the broken stove. She worked late into the nights, not just because she had to, but because she needed to. Healing, it turned out, wasn't soft. It was work. Physical, mental, emotional. And she was doing all three. A week before Christmas, Camille received a plain envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a letter, neat cursive. Her mother's handwriting. "I know you won't respond. I wouldn't either. But you should know the DA offered me a plea deal. I'll likely avoid jail. A fine, some kind of community service. And my name dragged through every social circle I once led. You wanted consequences. Now you've got them. You wanted your story told. Well, it's all anyone talks about. But I wanted you to hear something from me. Not the media, not lawyers. Just me. You were always stronger than I wanted to admit, and it scared me. I thought if I could control you, I could contain what I could never be. Turns out, I raised the one woman who couldn't be bought or buried. You won. Take care of the house. Your grandfather would have been proud." Camille folded the letter, slowly, then fed it to the fire. She didn't need her mother's guilt. She didn't need her approval. She had the truth, and finally, herself. On Christmas Eve, Daniel showed up again. He brought a pie he clearly didn't make and wore that nervous half-smile Camille had grown used to. "Thought maybe you'd want company," he said, "or at least someone to eat too much sugar with." Camille let him in. They sat on the floor with mismatched plates, sipping hot cider, the tree glowing with hand-strung lights Camille had put up the night before. At one point, Daniel looked around the room. "Feels different in here." Camille nodded. "Because it's mine now, fully. No more pretending." He studied her. "What are you going to do next?" She looked out the frosted window at the frozen lake. "I think I'm going to start something that matters," she said. "A foundation. For girls like me. The ones no one believes. The ones they silence." He smiled. "That sounds like something your grandfather would have loved." She smiled back. "It's exactly what he would have loved." In early January, Camille was invited to speak at a local women's justice conference. She nearly declined, but then remembered the weight of her grandmother's words, her grandfather's letter, and all the women who had emailed her since the story broke. Strangers who wrote things like, "You gave me the courage to confront my own mother. You made me believe I wasn't crazy. Thank you for saying what no one else would." So Camille said yes. She stood on that stage with her palms open and voice clear, telling the truth, not for revenge anymore, but for reclamation. Because sometimes, justice isn't about punishment. It's about taking your name back. But the story wasn't over yet. Because one afternoon in February, while digging through a forgotten drawer in the cottage's study, Camille found something odd. A deed to a small plot of land in rural Vermont. It was signed by her grandfather, titled only in his name, unmentioned in either version of the will. She nearly dismissed it, thinking it a lost record or forgotten property, until she saw the note paperclipped to the back. For the next chapter, she'll know what to do. Her heart pounded. Was this part of his plan? A safety net? A secret? She looked up at the snow falling softly outside, blanketing everything in white again. There was still more to uncover. The property was buried in the Green Mountains, nearly 5 hours north of the lakeside cottage. Camille drove alone, the deed folded inside her coat pocket, directions scrawled in the margin of her grandfather's old journal. Snow had melted into thick mud along the winding roads, painting the winter scenery in shades of brown and memory. She didn't know what she expected to find. A broken shack? In another key? Maybe just a field and a ghost of a man who had never stopped protecting her. But what she found was far stranger and more deliberate. At the end of a narrow gravel path hidden behind a dense curtain of pine trees, Camille found a gate, old iron, rusted but standing. A hand-painted wooden sign hung from the top rail, swinging slightly in the wind. Red Birch Refuge. She stepped out of her car and unlocked the chain with a key that had come with the deed. Small and copper, labeled with nothing but her initials. CD. The gate creaked open with a shiver of snow, revealing an untouched stretch of land blanketed in birch trees and soft, rolling ground. Just up the rise, tucked between trees, was a small cabin. Simple, square, built by hand. Not the kind of place for hiding wealth, but for building something real. Camille stepped inside the cabin slowly, boots crunching against the packed earth floor. The air was dry, quiet, and filled with something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Inside the cabin, she found a table covered in old blueprints and notes, maps of the property lines, and a small lockbox. A notebook sat in the center, labeled in her grandfather's handwriting. For her hands only. She opened it. The pages were filled with plans, sketches, journals, ideas for what the land could become. A sanctuary, a healing center, a legal workshop for women escaping coercive control and financial manipulation. A place where silence wasn't, survival, but healing was. Camille stared down at the sketches and felt her throat tighten. The notebook wasn't just a dream. It was a map. A blueprint for legacy. This land was never meant to be inherited and forgotten. It was meant to be built into something more. That night, Camille stayed in the cabin, lighting a small fire in the iron stove and sleeping wrapped in a blanket of cedar scent and possibility. Her dreams were restless, but electric. In them, her grandfather walked beside her through the woods, pointing at places he said were waiting for seeds. Back at the lakeside cottage, Daniel returned to find Camille's note on the table. Gone to Vermont. Found something he left behind. I think this is what comes next. He smiled to himself, then picked up the journal she left open on the desk. A list was written in her new handwriting: file land conversion papers, register nonprofit foundation, apply for women's development grant design first cabin layout, host opening by fall. A postscript read, "The family may have tried to bury me, but this is where I plant everything they couldn't kill." When Camille returned to town a few days later, she was different. Not harder, not colder, but anchored. She met with Eleanor, thanked her for everything, and asked her to help draft the legal framework for Red Birch Refuge. Eleanor didn't ask for an explanation. She simply agreed, eyes misting with pride. Camille then called a local architect she once helped pro bono through the legal clinic. They met over coffee. "I need cabins, not luxury ones. Real ones. Safe. Warm, for women starting over." The architect blinked. "Are you starting some kind of retreat?" Camille shook her head. "I'm starting a future." By spring, news had spread. Quietly, organically. Camille didn't need headlines anymore. She didn't need reporters outside her door. She needed the right people at the table. Former clients of the legal clinic reached out. So did 2 women who had messaged her after the podcast interview months back. They wanted to help, donate, volunteer, share their stories. Camille held her first gathering under the birch trees in late April. Just 6 women, folding chairs, and a fire pit. No press. No ceremony. Only honesty. And no one interrupted her. Meanwhile, Brielle moved out of their parents' house, finally silenced by the void of James, the absence of social status, and the reality that some doors never reopened once slammed. Patrice? She vanished from the public eye. The fine was paid, the community service quietly served, but her name never returned to its pedestal. And Camille didn't chase justice anymore. She simply became it. One day, standing under the tree line of red, "Birch!" Daniel joined her, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "You've changed?" he said gently. "No," Camille replied, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I've just finally become who I was before they tried to cut me down." He looked at her. "What do you see when you look out there?" Camille turned, the wind lifting her hair slightly. "I see stories that haven't been written yet." She smiled. "And I'm ready to help write them." By the time summer came, Red Birch Refuge had taken root. What began as a sketch in her grandfather's notebook had become a living, breathing sanctuary. 3 cabins stood, humble and warm, each with hand-carved signs above the doors, bearing names Camille chose intentionally. Truth, Haven, Ember. Each name had meaning. Truth for what she'd fought to uncover. Haven for what she never had growing up in Ember, for the fire that never died, even when everyone tried to bury it. The cabins weren't just shelters. They were lifelines, for women who'd been silenced, erased, used, and discarded. For the kind of girls Camille used to see in the mirror, crying into pillows while their world spun out of control. Now, they had somewhere to land when the noise of betrayal quieted and the real work began. Camille didn't do everything alone. Amina left the legal clinic and became her co-director. Eleanor stayed on as board counsel. Daniel visited often, sometimes with donations, sometimes with paint and tools, sometimes just with silence and space when she needed it. They never defined what they were. Camille didn't want another title built on performance. But his presence, steady and real, became the kind of warmth she trusted more than any promise. One afternoon, Camille sat on the back steps of the Ember cabin, sipping iced tea as wind rolled through the birch grove. A young woman named Janelle, barely 22, sat beside her, nervously clutching a folder. "My mother said I was making it all up," Janelle said. "That I was just dramatic. That if I really needed help, I'd ask nicer." Camille nodded slowly. "So they taught you to apologize for your pain." Janelle looked at her, eyes glassy. "Yeah." Camille looked out at the horizon, her voice low. "They did the same to me." Silence. Then Janelle asked, "How did you stop being angry?" Camille smiled faintly. "I didn't. I built with it." On the anniversary of her grandfather's passing, Camille returned to the lakeside cottage. She sat by the dock where the two of them used to fish, an unopened bottle of his favorite root beer resting beside her. She read his journal one last time, pausing on the last page, where he'd written something just before the ink faded. She'll think she's alone for a while, but she's not. She never was. She just needed to remember how loud her spirit was before the world taught her to whisper. Camille whispered back to the sky. "I remember now." Later that night, she lit a lantern and placed it on the water, watching it drift softly across the lake. She didn't need revenge anymore. She didn't need approval. She had something far more powerful, her voice, and she had given it to others too. Back at Red Birch, a small brass plaque was installed beside the welcome gate. It read, "In honor of every woman who was told to stay quiet. Here we speak. Here we rise." And under the birch trees where stories were once buried, they bloomed.